Good afternoon. You're watching Up to Data, a retail news chat show in which we discuss all things technology, digital transformation, and of course data. On today's segment, we have Mark Tesseyman, the CEO of Liwa Trading, joining us here at the London project in the gorgeous Blue Waters Island. Welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us here, Mark. First things first, how has 2021 been for Liwa?
Well, an interesting year, obviously, coming out of 2020. And I think, it was actually funny, I was talking to my chairman yesterday, and we were talking about how actually very good the final quarter of 2020 was last year, because obviously we've got some comparisons now, and I think, it's very difficult to predict what happens, but ironically, we had a very good year for 2020. I think the pandemic made us look very closely at all elements of our business. And we actually made some huge strategic changes early in the year, probably January and February, because retailing's always been about, rapid change and adapting and doing different things, and being fairly fast on your feet and so on and so forth. So we made some massive changes in our business. Primarily, we're a franchise business in history, but what the pandemic did to us, it made us look at the individual models that we've got. And we actually made a strategic decision to do more own label.
Okay.
And that has proved to be very, very successful. And it gives us a whole new growth strategy for our business going forward. But you go from a franchise business to, the statistics are that now we buy, in 2021, 65% of all the units we sell, we actually buy.
Okay.
Whereas if I look at 2019 and 2020, it would have been 90% of the products were from a franchisor.
Right.
So in terms of a strategic change, it's absolutely huge for us. But then you've got things like skill set, your manpower, your processes, your systems, everything needs to be adapted to moving that.
Sorry, was this a reactionary change, or was this something you have been planning long before?
Well, I think we'd already got one own label business, and that was kind of doing okay. So with that one, we needed to rapidly gear up our supply lines to make sure we could get hold of merchandise, and we made some strategic changes. That brand's called Dwell, and it's been with Liwa for many, many years, but now it's a completely different format. We're selling, a broader set of merchandise and so on and so forth, which is fantastic. Right. But I think the problem with franchising is that if the franchisor gets a cold, then you get the flu, and you get it much worse, because you're an output of their input. And it's a major problem if they've got major problems. And the pandemic, I think we learned that there are several, franchisors that coped with the pandemic better than others, and so we had to react accordingly. So we struck deals with some of our franchise partners to say, well, actually, we think we can get the product faster than you can. Yeah. So we just worked collaboratively with them and sourced some products. And I think people were open to doing very, very different things, where there was this, in some franchise models, it's, master-slave kind of relationship. All the walls got broken down, different approach completely. People were much nicer to each other. They were very understanding about the various different circumstances that people have got going on. Yeah. And I think it was hugely advantageous to, join companies together. So this partnership thing, which is very important to us, was very, very evident, I think, as we move through the year.
So we've seen a lot of retail collaborations and partnerships over the course of the last years changing and evolving, right? So one of the things we saw is a lot of fast fashion brands that were going bankrupt, for example, Debenhams and Forever 21 globally, but it didn't quite affect the regional operations as much. How does that work?
Well, again, those supply lines, can be established. So, for example, if you've, one of our major businesses, La Senza, and that's a business that was obviously a standard franchise business. It used to belong to L Brands and got sold to private equity. Mm-hmm. So there was a transition there, and when you're taking a business from a pure retailer and you're giving it to a private equity fund, they don't really know how to run, and then they've got cash issues and whatever, and transition issues. But we have the relationship with factories. We know where the products come from. So if you know where the products come from, you just pick up that dialogue and you say to your partner, look, we know you've got this going on. We can probably have the conversation direct. So we employed designers, we employed buyers, which, we used to have buyers in our team, but they weren't really buyers because in a franchise model, they're more like selectors. They're selecting products, from a catalogue, rather than actually designing it, sourcing the raw materials, working with the factory, and so on and so forth, and doing the whole logistical process. So that was it. Those conversations were forced upon us. Or you see in that situation, in many instances where people are going bankrupt, you've got to run your business. So you have to very, very quickly, and you have to have the supply line. So in many instances, you go direct to supply. But then you have to have the skill set in place, and you've got to get people really quickly. Yeah. And in this region, many businesses are predominantly franchise driven. So it's just a different way of working.
We've also seen another evolution happening, right? Like you mentioned, the region, many businesses are franchise driven, but we also have a lot of family businesses.
Yes.
And then we've seen this whole D2C sort of, I can't call it revolution yet, because there's a few on and off brands doing it right now, but then there is a move towards direct to consumer. Do you see massive potential in that approach?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's an evolutionary thing. At the end of the day, retailing is a very simple discipline. You've got to give the customer what they want, when they want it, at a price they're prepared to pay. Simple as that. So if they're telling you that they want it by a particular methodology, then you should give it to them that way. I mean, we've spent some time recently doing more consumer research, actually talk. I mean, I'm here in Dubai Thursdays. I come into Dubai every Thursday. I spend time in the stores, not only reviewing our businesses, but talking to customers. Mm-hmm. So I think it's one of the things that's sometimes missing. You find that a lot of businesses look inwardly all the time. They don't get their head out of the trough and actually talk to consumers. The consumers pay the wages.
Yeah.
So you have to talk to consumers and make sure you're getting direct consumer feedback. So if the consumer wants direct to consumer, the consumer has to have direct to consumer. Right. So I think there's an evolutionary path with all these things. Obviously, e-commerce has made. Everyone talks about e-commerce and this big splash that it's made, and so on and so forth, and how important it is. It's still a tiny percentage of revenue, in absolute terms. A tiny percentage of the total, economy here for retail. It's not as big as you might think.
Why do you think that is? Is that because consumers in the region are still shopping driven in terms of the experience of it, or are there other reasons?
Well, I think there's a DNA in the consumers here about going to malls, and it's unlike anywhere else in the world. I've worked in a few places around the world, and it's just different. People go to the malls to be sociable. They socialise in malls, they eat in malls. The proportion of F&B is bigger, anecdotally, and it's just a different DNA. So once you understand that, I mean, I think if e-commerce is an extra channel that protects your market share and your position, then you've kind of got to do it. You can't. It's not an option not to do it, but you have to do it profitably. And I think it's one of those. And there's lots of e-com businesses that make no money. And when we looked at our business, the core principle that I instilled in our team was that we had to make money. Mm-hmm. So we deliberately were slow to the party with e-com. I've been with Liwa 6 years. And we were doing lots of different things in terms of sorting out our systems, our infrastructure, and our warehousing. Because if we'd done e-com and you hadn't done the back-to-front piece, then it would have failed singularly. So we had to very carefully look at when was the right time to do e-commerce and how should we do it. Because what historically happened, I mean, I've been in the region nearly 13 years now. And what historically happened, the family businesses here used to say, oh, the world's doing e-com, we need to do e-com. Let's employ somebody from around the world that's done e-com, we'll bring them here and they'll recreate it. And of course, that's what happened. But that may well have been e-com kind of 15, 20 years ago, somewhere else in the world. And what happened in technology is moving so fast. So lots of companies here that did it 10 years ago, they set up these big teams, they bought these massive platforms, these tech decks that require maintenance and they cost millions to do. I mean, I know some of the family businesses here have invested millions and millions and millions in these technology stacks and built huge teams. Well, actually, you don't need to do that anymore. You don't need to buy a Magento platform and install it in your system and integrate it and do all that kind of. You don't necessarily have to do that.
Ooh, are you going to reveal the trade secret then of doing it profitably and cheap?
Well, you've got to think about the methodologies. You've got your pure play opportunities, and then you've got your marketplace opportunity. So I think if you're a franchise business, you've got to work through the dynamic of what your franchisor will let you do and won't let you do. Some people want to control e-commerce from outside the region into the region, so your hands are tied to a certain extent. So you have to work in partnership with that. But once you've got over that hurdle, let's say you can do a pure play. If you can do a pure play, then you've got to work out how you do it. So do you do it, mirroring the host brands' platforms? And they've probably got these big platforms, and there comes a big price tag associated with that when you can't integrate those kind of things. So sometimes that's not an option because it's just too expensive. And a lot of pure plays don't make money.
Yeah.
They just don't. And here, I think in the region, don't forget there's a lot of things like cash on delivery. So for example, you've got an order confirmed, but you've actually got no money in your bank because the consumer's not paid for it. But every time the product goes out the warehouse to the consumer, there's a cost.
Right.
And then it comes back because they're not in, and then it goes back out because they are in, and then they're not in, and it comes back again. So you're incurring costs all the time. So that's where your profitability kind of gets whittled away.
Right. So from what you said, you mentioned that cash on delivery itself can be a non-profitable entire journey for a pure play e-commerce player. But today we're talking about buy now, pay later. I mean, that should add on to the problem, right? I mean, how are so many retailers moving towards that then?
That's a different thing. So, buy now, pay later, you can generally do a deal, with your bank. So you're not losing money that way. Buy now, pay later, you've got some money basically.
Okay, so the cash flow is going down.
The cash flow is not a problem. So if you were to give me that option versus cash on delivery, then I'll take the buy now, pay later.
Right, now I'm coming to Liwa then. So you did mention that you figured out some off-the-shelf solutions
Sure.
for making your e-commerce journey profitable. Can you tell me more?
Well, I definitely can't give you all our trade secrets. We definitely can't do that. But again, it's no secret. I mean, we're using Shopify Plus, for example, for a couple of our. The first one we actually went with a third-party vendor that was recommended by somebody else, and it's proved to be really expensive. When the pandemic happened, we looked at our Dwell business. We launched our Dwell business online within 5 weeks from scratch with a Shopify Plus platform, just because it's fit for purpose. Now, I couldn't have done that 10 years ago. I couldn't have done that 6 years ago. But just there are some fantastic solutions available now. The skill is being able to find them and make sure that they're suitable for your business. And then the other thing is you can't procrastinate.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these bigger organizations, they can take a long time to make a decision, some of the bigger groups. Now, we're not massive, but we're not small either. The big advantage we do have is that we make decisions very, very quickly. We have a very linear kind of management team. The exec team, meet regularly. So, for example, the leadership team that we've got in the business, we have a functional meeting once a week where everybody sits together and debates what goes on in the business. And then I have a one-to-one meeting with each of the functional leads every single week for as long as it takes. And those are sign-off meetings. Those are where we make decisions. It's yes or no, and off you go. So there's no committees around deciding what you do or you don't do.
Oh, great.
So it's great. It works.
Right. So you did mention that a lot of retailers in the region aren't really listening to their customers, which is where data sort of comes in, right? You collect all of this data. People are calling data the new oil, the new soil, all of these buzzwords around data. But then not a lot of people have actually figured out what to do with this pool of data that they're actually sitting on. How is it that you are leveraging all this good quality data you've garnered and generated from your stores as well as your e-commerce platforms?
Yeah, a lot of it's not necessarily good, by the way. I mean, I think you can, a lot of these systems that you have, whether it be CRM systems, a lot of them you've got to be careful because if it's garbage in, it can be garbage out in terms of how you've constructed the one to work. All retail businesses have got data, as you say. I think sometimes, if it's transactional data, for example, then you've got to be able to tie that back to a consumer. If you can tie it back to a consumer, so we've got a CRM scheme that we instigated a few years ago, and a database, to try and get transactional data, obviously from consumers, and then understanding frequency of spend by brand, what they're spending it on. In an ideal world. And then we have buckets in our database,
okay.
and it's essentially driven by value and frequency of spend. So we call them high value, high loyals. They sit in this top band and they love you to bits. You could probably run them over in a car and they'd still come back and shop with you because they love what you do. And a great example is our Licenza business. 55% of our sales come from the database.
Okay.
Now that's huge. So you have to look after it because if you don't look after it, then ultimately you're going to have a problem. And then what we do is we watch whether people drop down the segmentations. And if they drop down the segmentations, then we want to kick them back up again. So we kind of try and incentivize them to go back up to the top again in terms of spending habits. Now, that's not necessarily always promotions and things like that, but it can be. So you've got the data and you can read all that kind of stuff. The end game sometimes is to try and get the data to help you, make better buying decisions. But that you can only, if you're getting transactional data, then all you're doing with that stuff is it's the product that you bought. It's not the product that you haven't bought.
Right.
So you have to get consumer engagement separately to that, because you've got to have consumer listening groups. You've got to talk to them about what you're not offering them that you want, and so on and so forth. So there's two definite I think pillars to it. There's the pillar on data from the transactions that you got and the product that you have bought, and then there's all the consumer-led stuff that you anecdotally need to speculate and listen to consumers and go and maybe buy things that you don't have, and so that you can learn a little bit more about that when you do get it in, you can start to evolve your strategy.
Right.
And similarly, because this is, you've got franchise models and then you've got own label. Franchise models, you get a lot of them are push models. You just get the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you analyze the data that comes off pushing the stuff.
Right.
And then you've got, for example, if the franchisor is pushing things that you don't want, you've got to convince them not to send it.
Yeah.
Different world when you're in own label.
Yeah.
Because you're in full control of your own destiny.
Right. And you've obviously done it with Licenza, which is why data plays such a massive role. You said 55%.
55% of the sales come from our database, yes.
That's amazing. So with Licenza specifically, is there any personalization that goes around with this 55% or that's resulting in this 55% sales? Is there a loyalty scheme, or is it just personal engagement and conversation that you're having with these customers?
It is. I mean, we've got a long way to go with it. I think it's something that we need to learn how to finesse it a bit more. People get points when they obviously they transact, and obviously they can redeem points and so on and so forth. The higher level of personalisation, I think we need to do more work on. I think it's probably one thing for our teams to just a bit more. We need to I should set some more objectives specifically around that. But I think we'll get to it. But we already know quite a lot about our consumer.
But do you think rewards is the best way to go about loyalty? The point system?
Well, I just think it's been historic, actually. And you could argue that it's quite lazy and quite clumsy, and there'll be new ways of engaging with consumers. And I think you're absolutely right. I think what we are learning is that I think if you look at the age profiles of consumers, then certainly the younger people, they have a completely different mindset. To somebody my age. I mean, I've been in retail for nearly 40 years. If I think about the way things happened in, the early 80s when I started my career, and the way that shopping behaviour is now, I mean, the youth today have a different shopping, I think shoppers are far more promiscuous now than they ever used to be. They will go to lots and lots of different places to satisfy and satisfy what their demands. And of course, they'll go to lots and lots of different channels. Yeah. It never used to be like that. You get up, you go out your front door, you go to the high street, you buy your stuff and you go home. Now look at all the choices you have. Yeah. So you've got to make sure that the analytics and the data that you've got is laser sharp in terms of some of the stuff that you're implementing. But the one thing that you always do know, it'll never be right. It'll always need refining. You just got to have the aptitude within your teams to be able to do.
In that context, have you seen anybody globally nailing this entire concept of customer loyalty?
I mean, in my dim, distant past, I used to run a business in the UK that was targeted at slightly older ladies, and so 60 plus, and actually nearly 80% of our sales used to come from the database. Okay. So we knew what to talk to them, and we rescued this business. This business was making significant losses, and within 3 years we'd introduced this scheme. We decided to talk to the customers and mail them specifically, and it was revolutionary in terms of what happened, because that data really reinvented the business, and we connected the data up with the individual buying model as well, what we were buying, because we were speaking to people. So it was fantastic. For me, that was really powerful. And those principles I think you can employ, or I've certainly employed in many of the roles that I've had. If I think about world-class retailers, I mean, I worked for them for 7 years in the UK. I worked for Next Retail in the UK. I genuinely believe they're world-class in terms of what they've done. I think they've evolved their model, to suit their consumers. They've got a completely different business model. Yeah. When I started with them in the early 80s, it was a premium kind of aspirational business. It's clearly not that now. It's got very broad appeal, but the technology they deploy in their business and the analytics. I mean, for example, one snapshot, because I used to, be involved with them here in a previous life. I couldn't believe that, for example, a one product could go out of the warehouse and back 5 times before it got sold to anybody. They built their systems so that if an order went out to a consumer and it comes back, it gets processed and put back into a pristine condition, but it can go out and back up to 4 or 5 times before it actually gets sold.
Oh, wow.
Amazing. I mean, absolutely amazing. Yeah. So that's true efficiency. Yeah. So and I know one of their internal KPIs is around efficiency and so on and so forth, and just doing things better. Yeah. You know, so I think if you have that as a mindset and it served that business very well, truly a world-class business.
So let's talk about technology then, right? Technology obviously has a key role to play within the retail space today. What technologies are retailers prioritizing on today to enhance experiences? And what is it that you were doing as well?
I mean, we've got some fairly basic things that we need to get done. You know, I mean, we've got legacy systems in our business that need to be replaced. Yeah. You know, down from POS right the way down. And we're in the middle of implementing a new merchandising system as well. And again, the problem with that is garbage out, garbage garbage in, garbage out, should I say. You've got to get these parameters correct and set up. So you need the basics in your business to make sure that you're operating. I mean, we work with, I'll give you an example, we work with Aramex on our fulfillment for warehousing and so on and so forth, because they had warehouse management systems in place. We had a legacy business that had got lots and lots of different warehouses with different systems. You know, we had to get a solution. If I'd invested our money on running our warehouses and putting all those new processes in, it would have cost tens of millions of dollars. We just couldn't do that, so we outsourced that to a third party, and it revolutionised our logistics and our warehousing. Then we have to integrate that with our tech deck that's in the office, which people have done. But that's just one element of it. You know, if you start to think about buying and merchandising, then I was talking about the allocation piece and profiling of stores and so on and so forth. Yeah. You have to build your technology. You have to have the knowledge internally to build the parameters, because what people offer you is generally just a technology stack, and it needs interpretation. So you have to have experts internally to be able to do that. So those are the things we're doing. So if you look around the world and there's any particular brand that's lasted longer than 16 years, they're doing okay, actually. So it's quite a fragile business. If you don't have a business where you can get consumers and evolve with them, and your brand needs to evolve with those consumers as they're getting older. And I always view this scenario about consumers and databases being like a leaking bucket, because consumers drop away all the time from your brands. You need to get new consumers in. So how do you do that? You've got to innovate. You've got to have technology. You've got to have insight. You've got to be brave. You've got to try different things. That's what retailing is all about at the end of the day. So it's a fascinating, I think, mix of both data, that you've got in your business, but you also have to have a vision. So I think from our businesses, then our strategy is to have slightly more niche businesses that look at specific sectors. Dwell's a great example. I think in the market, there's nothing like it. We've got a business called Simply Kitchen. There's nothing like that in the market. With La Senza, it's a very specific type of lingerie. We're going to build on that, but we're going to evolve that consumer journey. We're going to add product in, but we're going to actually talk to consumers and give them what they want. And then we'll grow that business. So I think if you're smart about it and you put in all the components together and all the elements, then at least you've got some sort of strategic plan that everybody in your team can buy into.
Great, amazing. Thanks so much for those awesome insights, Mark. It was a pleasure talking to you. I haven't stuck to any of the talking points I've had on my book. It was just a conversation, but lovely chatting with you today. And thank you for joining Up to Data once again. We will be back again next week.